we are going to talk about renewable energy procurement. Why is this important? Well, as you've heard already this morning, countries around the world committed in Paris in December that within the next 50 years, we will have a net zero carbon emissions economy. And that may seem something far off and a little bit academic, but the word zero is important because if the world is net zero, then pretty much everyone within it has got to be net zero as well. It's going to be quite difficult, for example, for lots of people to be net zero and the companies represented on this panel to be carry on as if business as usual. So everyone, you, me, everyone in the audience, companies here, will have, over the next 50 years or so, to reduce their emissions to effectively zero. Now, one of the drivers of the success in Paris last year was very much leadership being shown by companies around the world. And I think one of the big changes we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years has been a shift from companies waiting for governments to say that something is going to happen and then responding, to a situation where companies, investors, cities, states and regions governments have actually driven governments, national governments, to take action that they haven't always been, as we know, enthusiastic in taking. And it's been the lessons from companies and others that have enabled governments to make the sort of bold-ish commitments that they've made. And I say bold-ish because I think, as David and Jeremy said this morning, Paris does not get us on to a sub-2 degree path. It gets us in a better place than we were otherwise, but it doesn't get where we need to. If we're going to have a net zero carbon economy, then we know that the first step on that journey is going to be looking at the energy sector. It's going to be difficult to completely decarbonize aeroplanes. It's going to be difficult to completely decarbonize our agricultural production and a number of other sectors as well. We know, as we've heard already this morning, and doubtlessly we will hear throughout today and tomorrow, the energy sector is the first place. It's ripe for decarbonization. We're seeing that over 50% of new investment in energy last year was in the renewable sector, and that trend is set only to continue. Now, much of the focus so far in the renewable sector, as you know, in the clean energy sector, has been on the supply side. We've had feed-in tariffs, we've had renewable portfolio standards, we've had a whole series of policy measures which have had their ups and downs over the years, but all focused on driving more supply of renewable energy. Remarkably little focus on the demand side. So everyone's been interested in who's going to sell the stuff, not an awful lot of interest in who's going to buy it. But of course, we all buy it in one way or another, and if we can stimulate demand, it'll not only show governments that this is not a green elephant or a white elephant painted green, but it's actually a genuine demand in the market for clean power, which should make it easier for governments to be confident in supporting renewable energy. But it also allows innovative new companies, many of them who are here in this room, to provide products and services, energy supply, directly to companies rather than only through the grid. So a couple of years ago, as part of the We Mean Business Coalition, which we are a founder member of, 7 now, actually getting on for 12 organizations, who all work with businesses who are interested in taking climate action, we developed a suite of corporate commitments under the banner of science-based targets. And a science-based target is effectively a way of getting from here to net zero. And you look at the range of actions that companies can be taking to meet that goal, and they will include things such as eliminating tropical deforestation from supply chains, responsible policy engagement, decarbonizing the transport systems, and first and foremost looking at the energy sector. And the first of those commitments, and one which we'll discuss a bit more today, is, as James mentioned, the RE100 campaign. A few companies, well, a growing number of companies who are committing to sourcing 100% of their power from renewable sources. When we launched this in September 2014, we were a bit worried about whether this would take off or not. About 10 weeks before, we had 2 valiant companies, one of whom is represented on the panel, who were committed. And about 10 days before, we had about 2 companies who were firmly committed. And it felt like about 10 minutes before, we had about 2 companies who were firmly committed. And then, miraculously, half a dozen turned up at the last moment, and we've now grown to 58 companies around the world who are committed to 100% renewable power. We expect that to double in the course of this year. They come from a range of sectors, from food, from clothing, from IT, from finance, and increasingly from the manufacturing sector. To the extent that those 58 companies, once they've met their 100% renewable power targets, will be responsible for buying electricity equivalent to all the electricity consumed in Hong Kong and Singapore. And that's just 58 companies so far, 90 terawatt hours. And as I say, that's going to grow. I've already mentioned why this is important. It's important because it creates demand. It's important because it shows governments that renewable energy policy is not just something nice, it's something that companies really want, and it provides a stimulus to the market that perhaps was absent or was perhaps lacking when we were reliant only on government policy. So as you've heard, we've got a fantastic panel representing companies who've made this commitment, and I'm going to ask each of them in turn just to give a couple of minutes to start off, so why they've done this. Many of them made this commitment when it was still much more expensive to buy renewables, and in some of the territories in which they operate, it may still well be. Why are they? I'm going to ask them to give 2 minutes each on why they're doing this, what's the benefit for them, and then we'll go into a bit deeper discussion on how they explain those benefits to difficult internal and external stakeholders. What are the barriers they're getting from policy, and what are the barriers they're getting from suppliers? And then a few words of wisdom for those of you who are thinking about taking on this commitment to encourage you to do so. So if I can start from Anne on my left, please.
Yeah, so I will start by introducing Heineken because, of course, the brands, you know, obviously the brands, but Heineken company is much more than the Heineken brand. So Heineken is more than 250 brands in the world, and we operate in more than 160 breweries in over 70 countries. And because today it's about how big corporate can contribute and tackle the big issue. For that, we have our vision, which is brewing a better world. Our vision, our sustainability vision, is about 6 pillars. One of them is reducing our CO2 emission. And we want to reduce our CO2 emission within production, in the way we produce our product, in distribution, but also in cooling, because most of our consumers prefer to enjoy our beer when they are cold or cool. Today I will mainly focus on production because it's where we make, talking about renewable energy, is where we make our biggest contribution. In production we aim to reduce our CO2 emission by 40%. And how do we want to do that? It's by reducing our energy consumption, of course, but also by investing in renewable energy. As of today, by end of 2015, when we look at our electricity mix, 23% come from renewable energy. And how we achieve that? By using mainly solar panels. So we are investing in different kind of renewable energy, but the biggest part is solar panels. So as of today, we have more than 60,000 solar panels with a capacity of 13 megawatts. But of course, for a big company or FMCG company like us, the question is how can we connect with our consumers and how to leverage the brand equity and engage with consumers. The good things today, it's consumers expect from us to act responsibly and to help them to make a positive contribution. So the way we linked the investment in renewable energy with brands, it's by providing them by beer brewed by the sun. The nice thing is, sun is a compelling story. Everybody who doesn't like being on a terrace, chilling out, enjoying a good beer, everybody likes, I guess. So it's a good thing, it's a good way to leverage and connect with our consumers. So we have installed our solar panels in Italy, in the UK, in Belgium, and most recently in Singapore. So if you go to Singapore, please order a Tiger beer. You will enjoy a beer 100% brewed by the sun. Same in Italy with Birra Moretti. Same in the Netherlands with Wixe. And if you go to the beautiful city of Vienna, please enjoy a Gosser. You will enjoy the first carbon neutral beer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Joe Franses from Coca-Cola Enterprises. Many of you will know Coca-Cola. A couple of words about Coca-Cola Enterprises. We're the business behind the bottle, 17 manufacturing sites. Very much Northwest European focus, so France, and some of the comments before around nuclear rang home in terms of our geography, so France, Great Britain, the Benelux countries and the Nordics. I guess in terms of answering your question, Mark, around why. So CCE, Coca-Cola Enterprises, we have a very clear sustainability vision about growing our business and being a low-carbon business in the future. We have a very clear target to halve our carbon emissions from our core business operations, including our manufacturing, our cold drinks equipment, and our transportation, so a 50% cut within a 13-year time span, so by the year 2020. A target that is also approved as being, you refer to science-based. I think that's been absolutely critical in our journey. And quite simply, renewable energy has to be part of that transition. It really is as simple as that. We are very clear that in terms of the power that we use to make our products, to power our factories, our strategy is very much a dual strategy. It is first and foremost where we have the opportunity to do so, to look at on-site generation. We've got a very small amount of solar PV on our rooftops. We're looking at some other interesting technologies. We're about to put a water turbine into our Belgian factory in Schofontein. Pretty small in terms of power. The second part of the strategy is really about working with our suppliers to make sure that we are transitioning our electricity contracts towards renewables. And it's not been easy. It's a complex landscape to have navigated. I'm sitting in front of a good couple of hundred people who probably spend every single hour of their day understanding that complexity. And for many of the corporates, including many of the panel members today, it's really not been easy to understand the complexity of national energy policy in each of our markets. It's certainly not been easy to understand the GHG Scope 2 protocol rules, which thankfully changed last year. So understanding that complexity has been at the heart of the challenge that we've taken on. But the business has gone for it. The business has essentially said, we understand the direction and that by 2020, we want 100% of our electricity to be from renewable sources. It's as simple as that. It's part of our strategy.
Great. Thank you very much, Joe. Over to you from the IKEA experience.
Hi, I'm Joanna. IKEA, you probably all know, makers of great deck chairs, which would be perfectly partnered with some solar-powered beer on a sunny day coming up over the summer. Anyway, yes, we were early on in the RE100 group, which was fantastic. And we made a pledge a few years back to be what we call people, planet, positive. So not doing less bad, not being neutral, but actually seeing as our license to operate only being there if we can demonstrate that both environmentally and socially we are doing good. And as part of that, we've made a commitment that by 2020 we will renewably generate at least as much energy as we use. Last year it was about just 53.4%, I think, worldwide. So we're well on target to that by 2020. So of course the first step to that has been about efficiency. So I think we've saved about 133 million euros since, where are we now? Oh, my numbers are very bad lighting in here. 2010. And since energy is our second biggest cost after staff, there's a very simple business case for doing this. And then in terms of generation, we've invested about 1.5 billion euros since 2010, primarily on solar and wind. We've got about 700,000 solar panels now, and I think 327 turbines. And why do we do that? Well, firstly, obviously, to cut down on that big cost, but secondly, because it gives us a lot of capacity to insulate ourselves from price rises and fluctuations so that we can take control and plan our business into the future. So it's really quite a hard-nosed business thing at the end of the day. And then beyond that, of course, looking through our supply chain, we're working with our suppliers both on efficiency, using cleaner technologies, and also helping them, using our experience, to invest in renewables. But I think overall the biggest next step for us is to fulfill our mission of creating a better everyday life for the many people, bit of Swedish English there. We want to be really the leaders in helping customers live more sustainably. So helping them to live more efficiently when it comes to energy generation, energy use, and generating for themselves through things like solar power. So it was great yesterday to be able to announce our partnership with Solar Century to now help homeowners in the UK to live more sustainably. So we do it for costs, for efficiency, because we want to be here as a business that's surviving and thriving in decades to come, and also because our consumers could expect it.
Great, thank you, Joanna. Andrew, over to you from Nestle.
Hi there, yeah, so I'm Andy Griffiths. I head up environmental sustainability for the UK and Ireland for Nestle. Apologies, I'm struggling with my voice a little bit today. So from our perspective, we have a very, very strong model globally, which is our create and share value model, which is about trying to bring together the social, economic and environmental aspects across our whole value chain. And for us, being the largest food manufacturer, the food and drink sector are particularly exposed to the impacts of climate change. So it's really important that we take action to drive this forwards. And again, we see it as being key that we drive collaboration as part of that, and the RE100 group are a key mechanism to help support that as well. So from that perspective, we've been looking at how we can accelerate our plans, and our first priority is, similar to the other speakers, energy efficiency. So for example, in the UK now, we've reduced our energy consumption per tonne by over 30% since 2010, which is the first building block. Then after that, renewables clearly play a key part in terms of how we can drive carbon down further. And in the UK, as of the 1st of April, we now very pleased to say that all of our grid supply is sourced from renewable sources, which is fabulous for us. And it's helped deliver a significant combined impact. So next year, when we see the full year impact, we will have seen over a 60% carbon reduction versus 2010 baseline. So we see that as important. And the other key element is in terms of how we approach delivery. So procurement is a key part of this, but we see additionality as being really important. So looking at how we can structure and support the renewables industry, primarily through PPA, and find innovative ways of moving that forwards. And again, over the next 2 to 4 weeks, you'll see some further significant announcements from ourselves on that basis.
Great, thank you. And last but by no means least, Mike Berry from Marks & Spencer's.
Thank you. I feel the British tiddler amongst these global brands up here. So let me tell a slightly different story. I'm going to make 5 very brief points about renewables. The first point, I think, and we've heard consistently across the panel, is the most renewable energy you ever use is the energy you don't use, and that's energy efficiency. And I think you all know that in this place. Most of us have achieved something like a 30% energy efficiency over the last few years improvement. M&S has done 35%. I don't want to labour that point because I think everybody in the room is capable of doing that. You'll see Joanna's talked about the substantial savings that you can get from that. We've seen the same, £22 million a year saving. It's very, very valuable. The point is, in terms of energy efficiency, I think there's a barrier of roughly 33% where typically a business begins to hit the buffers, where investment into making yourself more energy efficient, it begins not to make sense with the board anymore. You need to keep pushing, but it's incremental. So that takes you on to the second bit. That's the energy you do procure. And again, like many of the good companies on this stage, 100% of the energy we now procure is from green sources. Those are direct contracts. We're not tending to do too much on-site renewables. It just doesn't make sense if you think of the Marks & Spencer business model. High street stores, simply food stores and railway stations. It's very difficult to put up a wind turbine, put on solar on the roof. Where we're able to, our Castle Donington distribution centre, we've got 24,000 solar panels on there. Biggest solar installation at the moment on a rooftop in the UK. But I'm not going to labour that point, it's a one-off within our business model. The main challenges for us is we either wait for something like a fuel cell technology to come in that can be dropped into these many small diffuse points, stores all around the UK, or we procure green. And again, RE100 has helped enormously drive a commonality of approach, not just in the UK, but globally, interacting with the policy system and with the energy providers as well. So that's what we're doing within our own operations. But then you think and reflect about probably all our business models here. Our true carbon footprint lies in our supply chain and the consumer use of our products. What do you do about renewables there? Every Marks and Spencer food supplier is now on a journey to improve their factories to make them at least 20% more energy efficient. Again, the energy efficiency point, and more of them are starting to install renewables. Again, the wobbles we've had in the UK policy system has made it a little harder for some, but they're all looking at AD, food waste turned into green energy. They're looking at solar on roof, they're looking at wind, increasingly working with farmers in a farming base, they sell us meat, they sell us renewables as well. So that's back down in the supply chain. And then the final point about the customer. 32 million people in our shops every week. We've heard Joanna's great story about what IKEA are starting to do now, sell solar panels direct to the consumer. We're doing things slightly differently. We've got M&S Energy business, 400,000 accounts, 100% green sourced. But last year we put £400,000 into community energy schemes across the UK. Crucially, in terms of the conversation here, 51,000 people voted on how that money should be distributed. There's an incredible yearning and interest amongst British communities and I guess communities around the world at how micro and renewables can be put into their community and they can capture the benefits of them as well. So it's about what you do in your own operations, the leadership you provide in your supply chain, and the leadership you provide with your consumers as well. Thank you.
So you've done your energy efficiency bit, you've hit the buffers in terms of rate of return, but renewables are still more expensive. How did you convince your CFO to go into the renewable space rather than doing something else that's cheaper?
We've had no problem procuring renewables at a competitive price. I think the market fluctuates. It's very difficult at any one particular time to say we've lost some, we've gained some. But over the balance of Plan A, the 9 years that we've been running it, we've seen no particular on-cost in terms of renewables contract that we've done at all.
So you haven't had to say we're paying a bit more because of
Nope.
this? None at all?
All the conversation with the CFO has been this is the right thing to do. It's about leadership and it's not going to cost you more. The installations when we've done Castle Donington, 24,000 solar panels, will pay back for Marks and Spencer, even with the reduced feed-in tariff rates. We've seen sort of returns on that. But to me, there's a point here not being naive as well. There will be points and bumps in the road when it becomes a little bit harder. And only by collective action, and RE100, can we start to put a common message into the policy system. Again, I think we've all lobbied very hard and very privately over the last 6 months to get the stability back into the policy system, but also in driving carbon literacy across the entire, not just UK economy, but global economy. What will really drive renewables is not when just a few big brands are asking for it, when thousands, hundreds of thousands of companies are demanding renewables. And our job as leaders is to drive that and support RE100 on that journey.
Absolutely. So you're all consumer-facing brands, and Joanna, you, like others, you mentioned customers. Do your customers really care? Don't they just want something that's cheap, easy to take home, easily installed, and then they can forget about it?
Yeah, our customers do care, actually. And I think that, I've been at IKEA 3 years now, and I was quite surprised to see quite how much they do. Over 80% of our customers say that they would like to live more sustainably. They don't necessarily call it that, but they want to have a cleaner lifestyle, they want to cut their bills, they want to, they're very interested in renewables, they're very interested in reducing waste and so on. They don't necessarily know how to do that, and they're looking for answers. So there's definitely an expectation that we as a brand would be doing that on their behalf. And actually one of the big challenges I've found for me coming into my role is discovering behind the scenes all the things that we have been doing now for quite some time, and the customer doesn't necessarily know. So there's still that big gap. But definitely I think there's a growing trend for more and more consumer interest in this, but also more and more expectation that organisations will do their bit on their behalf.
Mike, you want to
Mark gave us a brief just because we're talking about the end customer. The end customer puts pressure on us, we put pressure on renewables or the energy industry to move forward as well. The point is well made that most consumers, 80%, expect us to take a lead. It's one of the reasons they shop with us, to remain confident, shop with us into the future. But the crucial thing about the customer, and I made the point briefly about community energy, when individual people see the benefits to them of participating in a low carbon economy, is when things take off. We've talked about community energy. The only other one to put into the room, obviously, is Tesla. People are starting to want to buy an aspirational car that performs well, looks good, and by the way, it's low carbon as well. And that's what all of us must drive on, is making it relevant to billions of customers around the planet. That's when the low carbon economy takes off.
Joe, just to kind of go on this, stick on this benefit side for a bit. If you were talking to, if there are a number of companies here who are maybe humming and hawing, thinking, well, maybe I'll do 10% renewables, or maybe I'll just get away with not doing anything and it'll happen. Why would you encourage them to do it? Why would you encourage them to make an ambitious target?
I think we've always found within our sustainability strategy that if you set ambitious stretch targets that are feasible, and also they have to be credible, and that's absolutely critical, that if you set that stretch, then it gives you something to work for. If you just go with a small incremental 5, 10, 15% target, you're not going to galvanize people internally within the business. When we first put on the table internally a look at this, the membership of the RE100, actually I'll go even further back. When we first looked at 100% renewable electricity, I'm going back 5 or 6 years, we rejected it because at the time actually it wasn't a credible pledge. You yourself said you had about 2 companies only a few years ago. 5 or 6 years ago, we did look at it. We felt it wasn't credible. We rejected it at the time. When we looked at it again, middle of last year, we realized that actually it was not only credible, but it was also feasible. I totally concur with Mike. We've had no problem procuring the renewable electricity that we already do purchase at competitive price. We're now at about 40% of our electricity coming from renewable. Last year it was about 18%. So in 2016 we've already stepped up. We have a roadmap now that will take us to 100% by probably well before 2020 if I'm optimistic. But it's actually been critical setting that long-term target to have those conversations internally. Procurement, engineering and technology. It's not just the sustainability people like myself. It's been absolutely critical to have that conversation. Bringing in some of our site directors. We've got 17 manufacturing sites. They're the ones who are interested in where their power is coming from, what the source is, how reliable that source is. They're interested in security of supply issues. So they're the guys that I've had to engage in that topic. And actually setting a 10% target just wouldn't have engaged them. It wouldn't have brought them to the table. Having that 100% target is a completely different kettle of fish. It's brought the financial people internally into the discussion. It's brought the engineering guys, and critically, it's brought our procurement team. They've been the ones that have gone round. We've adopted a country-by-country approach, looking at every single supply contract that we've had, and we've then gone into the details of that supply contract. We've looked at where we are buying guarantees of origin, where we have to change those guarantees of origin to make sure that we're in line now with the Scope 2 protocols that I mentioned before, and that's been a complex task. So actually, the expert in the business is well, it probably never was myself. It is now the guy who buys our energy. And 5 or 6 years ago, he really wasn't thinking about this at all. Now he's on top of this on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, so I mean, it's worth pointing out at this point that the companies, as you've already heard, they haven't just made commitments. Collectively, the 58 RE100 companies are already over 50% towards meeting their 100% renewable power goal. So it's not a nice announcement people made when the Secretary General of the UN or someone else was around and then they disappeared. These are actually things that are happening. But Andy, so we've heard so far that for IKEA, there's a sort of credibility. If you're going to sell solar kit to your customers, then you want to show that you know how to do it yourself. There's customer demand. It's engaged employees around the broader sustainability journey. What are the benefits that you are already seeing and you expect to see from this commitment?
I guess there are kind of 3 key elements. One is price certainty, which is really key to us. So having that forward visibility of what the price structure is likely to look like, which really gets our CFO excited. So that's great news. And then the other 2 elements are in terms of resiliency in our supply chain. So part of that is about energy security. And then the second one, as I touched on fleetingly before, is around the food and beverage sector's kind of external impacts and likely resulting impact as a result of climate change. So anything we can do to drive down that impact is of real value and helps build resilience across our supply chain.
Are any of you or doing or thinking of doing research which will show that you are retaining more customers or attracting more customers because of this kind of commitment? Joanna, Mike?
Yes, I mean, I think, as I said before, we've realised that we have this enormous gap between the reality of what we're doing already and people's perception. So yeah, my expectation coming into this role was that we were going to need to do a lot more on the ground. I think, of course, we still need to do more. There's more to do. But I think the art of engaging people on that journey is a very important one. I think, you know, it's been unfortunate that over the past few years there has been a fair amount of greenwashing, frankly. I think as Brits particularly, we have perhaps a more innate cynicism about some of these things than others. We certainly don't like other people telling us what to do. So I think there has been a bit of consumer reaction and toe curling to corporate green claims. And I think that there's a lot now that we can all do to actually take people on the journey, be a lot more transparent and show that this really is inherent in our business models rather than being some eco-bling. Because I don't think people are very interested in that anymore. And then to track, and that's what I think is going to be really interesting, is what consumers are genuinely interested in and how we can co-create solutions. And I think that is what's going to really engage people on the journey going forward, so that we are doing things differently, partly as a result of that relationship, rather than doing it behind closed doors and then showing people in a glossy report at the end of the year.
And just to briefly compliment a good answer there, I mean, the whole consumer journey has been 3 phases. The first phase was no news was good news. Don't be on the front page of The Guardian for child labour scandal or deforestation scandal. Businesses got quite good at that for 10 years. It then shifted to a more positive image about your broad brand. The Heineken brand, the IKEA brand, in the customer's eyes, broadly do good stuff, but they can actually put the finger on what specifically. The third phase we're entering now is much more exciting. This is about products and services that will genuinely enhance the consumer's life, that you can offer that deliver outstanding outcomes for them as an individual, but also in a low-carbon way that drives equality and well-being at the same time. And those seem very cheap and easy words to say in an audience like this. Believe me, it'll utterly disrupt how we operate as businesses of the future. And any business that is sat complacently by the side thinking, low carbon, I'll join in a few years when it sort of makes sense, forget it. Unless you're preparing now in your skunk works, looking at what you might be selling and how you're selling in the future, you'll get washed away, pure and simple.
Excellent, thanks. So there's a business case for it. It's pretty clear, everyone's benefiting from it. And yet, Joe, I wouldn't say you even alluded, you stated pretty clearly there's some quite tough challenges in getting this done. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Well,
I mentioned before just the sheer complexity of the landscape that you have to understand. If you just look at, so if I just think about our business and the countries that we operate in, so Nordics, Benelux, France, Great Britain, understanding the national energy policy in each of those geographies and the rate with which those national policies change, before you even get into the piece around feed-in tariffs and the benefits and the incentives that do or don't exist to put on-site PV, for example, that is just a hugely complex area. Then you get into the discussion that I sit in. So I attend on a monthly basis, I attend our Energy and Climate Steering Group, an internal group of people, brings together cross-functional representation, and we have a chart. We look at the same chart every single month, and that's a chart of our carbon footprint. And yes, we've seen it come down. We still have a gap, so we're probably not yet fully on track to meet our 50% carbon reduction target. And we know that to reach that target, we're going to have to look at things like renewable energy. Now, to understand how that renewable energy procurement impacts that carbon footprint, you have to get into the complexity of the reporting and the calculation. You have to really understand the greenhouse gas protocol. You've got to understand Scope 2, the Scope 2 part of that protocol and how it's changed. We're now, as many businesses are on this panel, we're now beginning to report both a market-based and a location-based approach in terms of renewable energy. And you know what? That takes some level of understanding. We're very good at making soft drinks. We're not necessarily that good at understanding that complexity. And that's been a tough road. And it's also been a road that changes. The rules change so frequently. It is kind of quite scary how the pace of change shifts, particularly in the policy space. So keeping up with that has been complex. Paris has sent a very, very clear signal. I couldn't agree more with the words at the very beginning around Paris. It has changed everything. It's given a very clear signal of direction, and we know now that the path towards a low-carbon economy is a very different path after Paris. And I think that's given many businesses the certainty that we were looking for in terms of policy. We just hope that that translates through into the national policies that we're having to navigate.
Well, Andy, perhaps turning to you, are you doing most of this using in-house resources, or are you using companies like the ones in the room today? And if you are using external suppliers, are they a help or a hindrance?
We are using externals. Similarly, with all the regional variations, with the complexity, it's incredibly challenging. And although we have some very competent individuals, it's not our core business. So being able to rely on those external agencies is really important. Some of them in terms of key providers of the technology, but also some of those other specialist organisations who can bring some of their knowledge and experience to bear as well, particularly in terms of contractual negotiation, in terms of understanding what the local infrastructure, local landscape looks like. So it's really core that we bring all of those different parties to the table to develop the most appropriate solutions.
And are you finding that in the sort of landscape of suppliers that you are able to identify and get what you need? Is it straightforward? I mean, someone, for example, who can interpret the policy landscape, someone who can understand, help you make the right technology choices. Is that pretty straightforward, or what would you ask for?
No, I mean, without bigging up our E100 again, I think that's one of the benefits of our E100 group in terms of bringing some of that visibility and understanding. If you're going out fresh into the market without organisations like the RE100 group to provide some support, it can be very confusing, bewildering, and potentially there's a lot of opportunity to select the wrong partners.
Great, let me just, I'm not quite sure whether I have to finish at 11 on the dot. I'm waiting for someone to give me a signal, but in the meantime, are there any questions from the floor? I've got plenty more questions, but we could go on for ages if I start. So any questions from the floor to our panellists?
Interested very much about what Mike was saying about Marks and M&S providing money for community energy. That is a step beyond negotiating with individual consumers. It's engaging with civic society, civil society, if you like. What was the thinking behind that? I'm very interested where that goes. A question probably, this is a buy one, get one free. I'm talking to FMCG marketers, so I'm going to squeeze a second question in. And that is relationships with government. Lots of stuff about complexity. Is government listening to corporate enthusiasm for green energy at whatever level you want to pitch it? Brussels, Westminster, Whitehall, or indeed any of the individual, the other jurisdictions?
If you'd like to take a start on that. I think I was just going to, actually, the questions are quite long.
I'll dive straight in. You gave a bog-off question, so I'll give a bog-off answer as well. The very nature of relationships, I'm so glad you've raised that, because business has got used to the last 30 or 40 years of living within its four walls. We do what we're competent to do. We don't get involved with this sort of strange world. We've sort of reached out a little bit, and we'll talk to Greenpeace and we'll talk to Oxfam as representatives of society. But the point you made is excellent, and I just want to sort of bring it to one specific point. We haven't got time for anything more. Cities. The ability to create solutions on a city scale rather than this national scale that's big and scary and nothing gets done. The ability of a London, a Birmingham, a Mumbai, a Delhi, a New York to actually bring together many different protagonists. The retailer, the community, trade unions, the local government, the local council, the emergency services, to create low-carbon solutions that takes one person's problem, I've got food waste in my prisons and hospitals, takes it to an AD plant to meet my food waste, and we get the green electricity back we need. The ability to create circular systems about storage. Your car becomes an electric car, but it's also powering your home when you get home in the evening as well. Now, that whole smart world is, again, easy words to say in here, it will come. And the ability of a business not to just drive the technology solutions, but the relationship solutions is absolutely crucial. And then the final point about government, absolutely fantastic question as well. Business, again, has got, I think, quite good at proactively lobbying for change when it comes to climate and other social and environmental issues. I think it's going to have to get braver again. So what we've done the last 6 months, we've all kept our heads down a little bit. We've pushed back against what we've seen as some of the bigger changes that have happened that made life difficult. I think business is going to have to start having a political voice with a small p. Not taking sides about religion or political party, but just saying we stand for something, and that thing is going to be difficult to do for us and for our customers unless we stand up for it.
Do you want to add to that?
Yeah. I'd echo that completely. I think that what's exciting right now is that there is a growing recognition that these challenges are so interlinked that no individual organisation or sector can tackle them on their own. I mean, IKEA is flipping massive. And it's very exciting what we can do on our own and in our supply chain and so on. But, you know, we recognise more and more that the complexity of these problems means we have to work in partnership. And that's scary, you know. That's scary for a retailer that's really done its own thing in a very refined way for a long time. And so breaking down those barriers and, you know, as I said, co-creating, sharing the story, accepting that actually no one has the answer yet, and that we will make mistakes as we go along, and that we will therefore need to be transparent and enable understanding of that rather than sort of name pointing and naming and shaming is going to be very important. And so I find that very exciting, and I think that similarly when we think about politics, whether big P or little, we need to kind of step back from that adversarial perspective and try to find ways of being a lot more collaborative in the conversation, because we need to kind of share each other's insights, experience and capabilities right now.
Two very quick points. I think that, so collaboration, absolutely critical. Quick plug for the RE100. I mean, when we were thinking about signing up, actually we had 3 really very, very constructive conversations with companies that had already signed up to RE100. And we were really getting into the weeds of, right, well, how have you done this? How have you looked at your guarantees of origin? How have you switched contracts? Which suppliers have you spoken with? And I think that it's those kind of conversations that are starting to happen. So I think that's absolutely key. I also think that the full value chain perspective is absolutely critical. That you're absolutely right, Mike. We've been looking at 4 walls, what happens in our factories, what happens for Coca-Cola within our cold drinks equipment and our transportation. That's the safe space. Actually now moving outside of that to look at our entire value chain, includes the packaging we use, includes the ingredients we use. So collaboration across that whole value chain will be critical. We've issued a carbon challenge to every single one of our suppliers. And that's a challenge which, actually, if you're relatively low impact in terms of our own carbon footprint, it's probably quite simple. It's about monitoring, it's about measuring. And actually, when you come to a supplier that is a high impact supplier in terms of our value chain carbon footprint, it's actually getting pretty tough now. And that is a carbon challenge that forms a part of our supplier relationship management framework. It's not something that I manage, it's something that our procurement team manage on a day-to-day basis. So they're the ones that are talking carbon on a day-to-day basis. And you know what? In a few years' time, renewable energy will be part of that discussion as well. So it's coming, but collaboration is absolutely key. The issues are far too big to be tackled alone.
Great. Question from the lady over here.
I was really interested in the 35% obstacle. What is that obstacle? What do we need to do to get beyond it?
Mike, do you want to start?
Just a brief answer. I mean, again, 2 such very, very good points in there. One is the way you're grounding and localising and personalising energy efficiency for people. It's already well talking about grand plans. It's got to be done at a granular scale in people's communities with friends and neighbours that they trust. The 35% is a proverbial figure. You know, some people in here might have done 60%, some might have done 20%. I see this consistently now. With your existing way of doing business, your existing housing stock, we are locked into a model that says today's solutions will get you to roughly a third, roughly. If we're going to break the mold, we need new business models, new ways of refrigerating food, new ways of storing food, providing food, clothing, whatever it is, and also housing people. So whatever the government can do to drive a step change of thinking about how we build the houses for the future, and we know we need millions of new houses in this country over the next couple of decades, let's make those as close to zero carbon as possible and build it in. If we don't get it right then, we'll spend the next 60 or 70 or 80 years trying to improve them by 30%.
Great, thanks. Go on, Andy.
I was just going to say the other key thing for me is not just thinking about the upfront investment, which is where we tend to sit. The other key element is when you're having to make investment on a replacement basis, again, going for the best solution possible. So the additional cost is relatively small, but the impact can be significant.
Woman at the front.
Joanna, I think you used the phrase perception gap around what you're actually doing and what people's perception is. I think this sector would say there's been a perception gap, dogging it for a long time, or maybe it's just something that the media prolongs. So I'm interested in what you are doing, all of you collectively as a panel, to make sure that your customers understand.
I think the perception gap piece is absolutely critical. I mean, I go back to my very first day at Coca-Cola Enterprises, and actually the job I realised, probably very much like you, Joanna, was tell the story. Be very brave and bold about some of the things that you are doing, because actually they are out there, and there's very low level of awareness. If I think about the sector, whether it's solar or solar PV or a whole range of different other renewable sources, I think there is a perception gap. I think that we touched on community energy before. The more I hear about community energy, the more I'm excited about it. It's a concept that I'd love to take into the business. If I introduced the topic today, I don't think anybody in our business would even have heard about it. So I think there's a huge perception gap. I think that we just have to continue to tell the story. We have to continue to collaborate. And the more we can show off the technology that is being used and tell the story around the efficiency of that technology and the fall in price. I still have people in the business who say to me, well, hold on a second, solar's actually quite expensive, and it changes every year, so we don't know when. It's a bit like buying your TV. You don't know when to jump on and buy the TV because it's going to change next year, so we won't do anything. And there's still that kind of perception gap. So the more that we can do to work together to highlight those kind of technologies, the better. So I completely sympathise, and it's something that it's people are more interested in the bad news. People are more interested in companies when they've done something wrong, not necessarily when they've done something that actually has direct benefit. I think the other thing that I'll say, and I'll stop in a second, I think that from our side, we are seeing pressure from our customers, and that's businesses like Marks and Spencer's, one of our biggest customers in the UK. It's those customers that are asking us as a supplier, asking Heineken as a supplier, well, what are you doing? And it's that kind of supply chain conversation that is really starting to happen, and that's a critical conversation.
Great. Joanna, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I would just second. I think storytelling is really, really key to this. I think two things have happened. One is that certainly as corporates, we have become understandably wary of blowing our own trumpet and being seen as greenwashing. So we've perhaps gone a little bit too quiet and humble, possibly. And then I think on the other side, there's a human tendency to glaze over when you hear the science stuff. I mean, I'm obsessed about sustainability, but I still do the eye glaze thing when we start talking about policy and science for too long. So I think that there's a middle ground in there, which is about simple engagement on the human story. And I think it's what we were talking about earlier, is really distilling this to, most of this is quite simple stuff. Most of this isn't rocket science, but there are day-to-day benefits, whether they are in your, having some cash in your pocket at the end of the week, whether it's having more time with your family, whether it's having a more comfortable home, whether it's having a community that come together around a shared interest. That everyone can relate to and engage to, and perhaps we need to demystify this agenda a little bit and start telling those success stories a little bit more so that people can understand and engage. I mean, when I explain the idea of having solar panels installed on your roof as basically being like a sun-powered cash machine, people start relating to it, I think, a little bit. They're at least intrigued rather than starting the conversation on megawatt hours.
And also freeing yourself from the tyranny of the large energy companies and spending a long time on the phone to their customer service units.
All those benefits we can relate to.
Sorry. Just to complete what yes, just Joanna said. It's indeed the consumers want, if we look at consumers who are really caring about sustainability, you have a large range of consumers who are not focusing on that. Still interesting, but they want something really pragmatic. So indeed, as you said, it's all about storytelling. So they don't really care about, at least when we look at the studies we have, they are more interested in having a quick solution. That's why, for instance, we worked on Brew by the Sun, and it's also about innovation. So you don't need always to just wait for what your consumers will tell you. You also can work ahead, not too much because otherwise you will lose the contact, but it's also the way you can change and influence behaviors.
Andy.
The other thing for me is there are two groups we tend to forget about from a consumer perspective. So one is our own employees. We tend to see them as employees, so we do need to engage them in our journey, but we also need to engage them as consumers and ultimately as advocates. So it's really important, and it's relatively easy to do that. The second one is upstream. So if you look up the value chain, again, we tend to look at our value chain as a group of businesses. But again, it's a group of individuals over which we carry a significant amount of influence and sway in terms of being able to share those stories and share the journey. So again, if we can engage those people, then we've got a real opportunity to get them out and start sharing the story more broadly.
Great, thank you. Very sadly, our hour is up. We could go on for a long time, so I encourage those of you who have questions to come to find the speakers after this and in the coffee break. Thanks to our panelists.